Irreverent, entertaining, cool. You're listening to LA Talk Radio.
You're listening to What Women Want with Judy Goss and Kristen West, only on LA Talk Radio.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to What Women Want Talk Radio. Thank you for joining us for our show tonight, Being Unapologetically Female. Kristen West and I co-host this amazing show, which just got onto iHeartRadio. So we're excited to have yet another platform to offer you shows on demand constantly. We want to thank you for listening out there. What Women Want Talk Radio has reached almost 1.5 million downloads since we first hit the airwaves. And between latalkradio.com's archives, iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, and now iHeartRadio, you can find us everywhere. So listen to those replays and like, share, follow, do everything like that when you do. I'm broadcasting from New York, and Kristen is out in our studio in LA at LA Talk Radio. So we're covering the entire country, basically, from coast to coast. Kristen, what's the word out there about being a woman in Hollywood these days?
Well, I'm thankful to be a woman. It's Thanksgiving, and I love being a woman in Hollywood right now. You know, we have our struggles, and I want to talk to Amy and Catherine about that, about the struggles of being a woman and being a woman in Hollywood. But you know what? We're making progress, and we're having conversations that matter. And I think that's something to be really thankful for because, you know, most women in history up until this point, if you think about it, because women got the right to vote in the U.S. in 1920. But for millennia before, women have lived under such tremendous oppression and silence. And we're finally at a place in our conscious development as a human species, as a human race, that women's voices are being really heard and being welcome to be heard, which is an exciting thing.
It is exciting. And as we were talking last week about, you know, speaking out and being heard, which we've had a couple of times, the show called Speaking Out on this radio show, I feel like it's enough about talking about it, and let's step forward and make some moves to do something about it. And that's the wave that we're riding on these days, that we see women taking action from the Me Too movement to politics to everywhere in our lives. And yeah, Amy Stanton and Catherine Connors are going to come on the line and talk about their book, The Feminine Revolution, which just goes right along with this wave. And I can't wait to hear their perspective on being unapologetically female in every industry. My background originally comes from high fashion modeling with Ford New York. And after that, I went to the other side of the camera and became a magazine editor and then an author with St. Martin's Press. And now I'm back in front of the camera, currently hosting my second season of AWE's real estate TV show Behind the Gates. I'm also a regular contributor on NBC and Fox, and a mom, too, of teenage twin girls. My household is very interesting right now. And I'm also an entrepreneur. I founded the company What Women Want Networking and What Women Want National Conference, which we just had our second annual one last month, which I'm very proud of. Kristen, tell them about you. You're not just an award-winning actress, producer, screenwriter, but the host of your own show, Horror Talk with Kristen West, and the list goes on and on.
Yes, I have a lot of fun.
I think it's a lot of work, too.
It is a lot of fun work. I host my own talk show. I call it the Entertainment Tonight Show for the horror community. It is a talk show with our genre stars and our scream queens, which sometimes they don't always get the appreciation they deserve. So I talk to people working in front of the camera and behind the camera in the horror genre. We have an interview with two rising scream queens coming up, Trisha Molina and Camille Montgomery, some rising stars in the genre coming up. And actually, right now, a new short film, The Carding Call, which was produced and co-directed by Candace Callens, is coming out. And I was happy to be on that project and support her. And it's now done shooting and in the editing room. So I'm excited about that. And just being on the show with you every week, it's always a journey, and I love it.
It is always a journey, up and down, sideways, all over the place. But we really bring out the issues that women want to talk about. So I'm very proud of that. And I'd just like to let everyone know that we're taking submissions for our What Women Want holiday gift guide. We extended the deadline, and it's 1 week from today, November 28th. So if you want to be included in this elite guide for showcasing women-owned businesses with the best gifts for the season, please visit whatwomenwantnetworking.com. After the show, of course, for more information. Okay, Amy Stanton is the co-author of The Feminine Revolution and the founder and CEO of Stanton and Company, a PR and marketing agency based in Los Angeles with a focus on promoting and building positive female role models and messaging for women. With deep experience in marketing to and building brands for women, Amy has a unique perspective on the women's landscape, the role of femininity in personal and professional lives, as well as the impact that unleashing our true feminine power can have on happiness, all of which she used to co-author her new book, The Feminine Revolution. Welcome to the show, Amy.
Thank you. It's so great to be talking to you and hearing from you.
Well, it's so great to have you. And you have your co-author on with you, Catherine Connors. Kristen, you want to bring her on?
Yes, Catherine Connors is a writer, entrepreneur, activist, and mother. She is the co-founder and CCO of Maverick, the founder and author of the website Her Bad Mother, president of Women Rising, and the co-author of The Feminine Revolution. As the former editor-in-chief of Babel and former head of content for Disney's Interactive's Women and Family portfolio, she oversaw the publication of hundreds of thousands of stories about women's lives that helped her develop a deep passion for helping young women and girls, which continues to inspire and guide her career today. Welcome to the show, Catherine.
Thank you for having me.
We're excited to have both of you. And, it's exciting for me especially. I know week after week, Judy and I do this show. We're a dynamic duo. We're a collaborative team. And I love to see other women collaborating together and doing great things. So how did the collaboration on this book get started, Amy?
Well, we too are big fans of collaborations among women. And when I've been thinking about the topic of femininity for about 5 years now. And every year I said, I need to write this book about femininity. Why? I'm not even sure. I think I was struck by lightning because I never had any particular desire to write a book, but I felt that there were so many important conversations going on for women, about women, feminism, equal rights, female empowerment, but no one was talking about femininity. And I was having my own personal experiences, trying to find balance, and wondering if the fact that I developed these more masculine qualities, leadership skills in the workplace, which were certainly serving me and still do, that maybe I'd lost touch with some of my more feminine qualities, my sensitivity, my emotionality, which are in some ways an even bigger part of me. And I was starting to wonder if those shifts in that might have been out of balance. And maybe that was why I had not met Prince Charming, because I wasn't allowing my more sensitive, emotional self to shine through in personal relationships. And so I started talking to many women about this and finding that I was not alone. Lots of people were having similar experiences, other experiences. It was such a fascinating conversation to have. And then a mutual friend introduced me to Catherine. And I'm so thankful for that, because from the first conversation we had, which was about 4 years ago, it was clear there was so much to talk about. And we had, in some ways, a real shared vision about the stories that needed to be told and the conversations that needed to be initiated. And every year I'd say, this is the year, this is the year. And as it turns out, this, in fact, is the year, because Catherine and I sat down early last year and had another great conversation. And I said, Catherine, let's just do this together. And I am so grateful, because the partnership has been amazing. Catherine is a superstar. We bring really complementary things to the table. And I think the accountability was really important certainly for me, but I think for us. And as we were talking about before, in some ways it's even more powerful because the two of us did it together. So in all respects, I am grateful, which is perfect for Thanksgiving week.
Well, and it just launched about 2 weeks ago. Is that correct?
It did, on Election Day of all days.
Oh my gosh, how apropos. That's crazy. Well, it looks like it's doing really well. So congratulations for that. So
Thank you.
the rest of the title of the Feminine Revolution is 21 Ways to Ignite the Power of Your Femininity for a Brighter Life and a Better World. Now, what I like about your book is that you pick apart stereotypical views, basically, of femininity, right? And twist the perspective around so we can use it to propel ourselves forward with a broader sense of being. I was a little surprised, though, and maybe this is because of my traditional ways of thinking a little bit stuck in my head, that you picked the first chapter as Be Emotional. Why is that?
Catherine, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think Be Emotional had to be the first chapter because I think for most women, certainly for both Amy and myself, it's the stereotype that most comes to mind when we think about when we think about stereotypical ideas of femininity, and the one that I think we most burden ourselves with in terms of trying to wrap our heads around how much emotionality is okay,
especially in business, right?
Especially in business, and in politics, in leadership. It's one of the stereotypes of femininity where we can truly say that women are damned if they do and damned if they don't, right? We saw with Hillary Clinton in her run for the presidency that when she was, when she didn't show emotion, she was criticized for not being feminine enough. When she did show emotion, she was criticized for potentially being unstable. So it felt like both the most universal of the feminine stereotypes, and it also felt like the one that most gets challenged, the one where we feel, to Amy's earlier point about her own experiences, grappling with her femininity, feeling as though she had to adopt masculine postures in the workplace. I have certainly been there myself. The number one thing, and we've certainly heard this since the book was published, the thing that women most want to talk to us about is that how much emotion can I show? Is it okay for me to show emotion? We argue in the book that emotion is such a core part of the human experience that it's almost absurd that we've gotten to this place in human cultural history still believing that there's something problematic about overt displays of emotion. But it's so tied to our ideas about, the way that women move in the world that we've decided culturally, and this goes across cultures as well, that emotionality is something that's the domain of women, right? Women cry more, women express love more openly, women do all these things that in some contexts we've also decided socially, that makes them unfit for leadership or less predictable or less reliable. So we wanted to take that and turn it on its head, both because it felt like the most dominant stereotype to tackle and also the one that's most pervasive.
Well, you can't get a better answer than that, can you, Kristen?
No.
And I'm not sure if my husband would agree with the flirt freely chapter. But I think maybe I'll take the book and read it so he won't see it. I caught myself actually reading the book, and I haven't read it in full yet. But I caught myself really, and I think Kristen did also, not wanting to put it down. And I, with a company called What Women Want and a radio show and all the thousands of women I've spoken to and heard speak and all that, this is very non-typical for me. And I felt like it was just, telling me so much. Like I said, you're taking the stereotypical, ways that we think of womanhood and femininity and all that and turning it around. And I just think that's so admirable. Don't you, Kristen?
No, certainly. And I think one of the things this book points out, and I think one thing our radio show points out, is that there's no monolithic way of being a woman. There's no right way to be a woman. There's as many types of womanhood in the world as there are women in the world. So I have to ask you, Catherine, what was one of the most surprising things you learned when you were working on this book?
I'm so glad you asked that, because for Amy and I think that the process of talking through and ideating and then writing the book was a very personal journey for both of us. I think, and we've asked ourselves through the process of writing the book and since, what were the easiest chapters, what were the hardest chapters, and at different points we made it a point of asking of each other that we take on the ones that felt at times more difficult. I struggled more with the chapters on flirting freely, owning your sexual power, those sorts of things that be glamorous, be seductive. Even though I've provided the anecdotes for a couple of those were the ones that were hardest for me to I don't want to say wrap my head around. I spent years prior to my career in media as an academic studying the history of femininity and the place of women and girls in social thought. So I thought a lot about these ideas as an academic. But one of the things that was beautiful about Amy and I writing this book together was that we were taking this personal journey, as I said. And so we both, but I certainly had to sort of confront my own biases around what a productive embrace of femininity could look like for me personally. And those were the ones that were more challenging because I've never identified as girly. I've always been more restrained in how I express myself in terms of flirtation or seduction, or sexual confidence, largely because it's just been kind of behind an armor. So those chapters for me were the challenging to wrap my heart around because those were the things that I kind of most needed to confront.
That's interesting. What about you? I was about to say, what about you, Amy?
Well, first of all, I wanted to go back to something you mentioned, which is that everyone's version of being a woman is different. Everyone's take on femininity would be different. Everyone's experience with feminine qualities is totally unique. It's part of what's so interesting about it. So I think it's really one of the reasons we wrote the book, because we wanted to explore this on a bigger scale and allow conversations that haven't been had to be had. I think in terms of surprising, there's so many aspects of it that are surprising. I think probably the part for me that has been the most interesting is my own personal journey that has paralleled the writing of the book, the launching of the book, and seeing how I can actually live it. Because one of the things lots of women ask is, how do I put this into practice? How do I actually experience this? And we deliberately, in each of the 21 chapters, give very practical, tangible tools, because we want for women to feel equipped to actually go out tomorrow and give it a shot. It doesn't mean throw the baby out with the bathwater. We still think the masculine qualities are really important too. Don't go into the office talking about tampons and painting your nails and crying all day. That's not what we're suggesting, but we are saying that there's an opportunity to really start to experience things in a new way. So I've been doing that, and I don't think it's a coincidence, and we write a whole chapter on singing and dancing, but I've become, and I'm comfortable saying in a positive way, obsessed with my dance classes. And I think that my exploration physically and emotionally of dance and dance classes, which I literally have not done since I was 5 years old, and the opening up that was going on in the writing process of the book has been really interesting. And then even thinking about challenging moments, of course, there are many, whether it was in the context of writing the book when Catherine and I had an ongoing negotiation about the title of the book with our publisher, which we absolutely love. So the publisher and we are all equally happy with the title now, but it was one of those things we felt so passionately about, and clearly the publisher has so much experience. So we had a healthy and sometimes frustrating on both sides conversation about that. And I would think when we would hit those road bumps, how do I operate in a feminine way here? How do I bring my feminine qualities forward? How do I bring more grace and gentility to the situation? And of course, if you take a moment to think before doing anything, it's going to end up with a better result. But there's no question that in actually applying these gifts and superpowers, as we call them in the book, I really am seeing shifts in my life, and I'm seeing the outcomes of challenging situations improving, and I'm seeing that I'm feeling better about it. One of the things that is, for me, important in the context of the idea of of femininity in general, and certainly some of these specific qualities, is it's about authenticity. This is about really understanding who you are and being able to, in a healthier, happier, more productive way, bring that forward. And so I feel like I've been doing that, and it's been exciting and, certainly not perfect. Definitely have my moments where I'm like, uh-oh, better practice what I'm preaching here. But I can see that it's powerful. And it seems obvious in some ways that bringing more gentility and kindness and softness and love forward is a powerful thing. I mean, we would both say that society needs a lot more of that these days.
Let's talk about that balance when we bring that love and that femininity, if you will, into the workplace. I feel like there's, and I'm going to play the devil's advocate here because I'm a little suppressed with my femininity. Although I do look like a girly girl, I'm a little bit more like a man inside. And I'm just wondering, how do we know when we're overstepping that cry freely, be emotional, type of mentality? I hate to be the kind of one going, well, where does this, when are we being a little too overzealous of claiming that power type of thing? I mean, there has to be a balance. And do you know that you're overstepping it?
Well, I would say,
go ahead.
Sorry, Catherine. I would say just to start, there's no one size fits all approach. And for each person, your authentic feminine self is going to be unique to you. And so part of that is an exploration and starting to test putting things into practice to figure out where that is and where your personal comfort level lies. We would say we've sort of overcompensated. I can say I have, and I'm seeing that it's not like I'm going into the office and being a radically different person, but I bring more awareness and more sensitivity, and I'm okay showing that. And I think that is powerful.
And your employees must love it too.
They do, actually. They feel really cared for. And it was fun. We were in New York for the book last week, and I brought 2 of my employees with me. And we were sitting in one interview that I was doing, but it was for print. And the 2 of them started to weigh in on their perspective on some of the ways in which we have femininity in our work culture. And that's everything from, we have a whole chapter about being sensitive and why sensitivity is extremely powerful. It allows you to sense, let's say, what your clients are needing, what people are experiencing around a boardroom table, what your employees are feeling. And certainly I'm sensitive. And when my employees aren't feeling right, I pick up on it sometimes faster than they do. And so it was fun hearing them talk about that because it means it's actually working.
I would add that emotionality is one of those things that we have had pretty much no space for in the workplace or indeed, in public spaces more generally. So I think there's a lot of room for making space for being emotional before we get anywhere near extremes. You're totally right that there needs to be a balance in all things. And, as Amy suggested earlier, saying that we turn workplaces into spaces where we're constantly rending our garments and pulling our hair and sobbing. But we think that there's a lot of space, given that those spaces have historically been framed as ones in which you only bring your most rational, controlled self to the table, and where it's practically considered even shameful to show emotion, in a meeting or in the boardroom. We're arguing that there's a lot of benefit to be derived from giving ourselves permission, for starters, of feeling emotion in the workplace, and that's the first thing. It's not necessarily initially about saying it wantonly, it's about giving ourselves permission to feel it. The second, especially for those of us who run businesses or run teams or manage people, to allow.
Hello?
We should be paying attention to it.
Yeah. No, I think it's also in how we label emotions, because I've been in situations where I've had to deal with people who are very committed to a certain vision of something happening, and they have it so much where there is no other vision that is possible, and I'm talking about a man in this instance, and literally his heart and soul are in this, but he can't see another path to executing something that's actually based in reality. Now, he would get labeled a visionary. He would get labeled ultra committed. He would get labeled he wouldn't get labeled, a crackpot. He wouldn't get labeled impervious to reason, irrational. And I think sometimes there are deeply feminine qualities that men exhibit and get lauded for it. But then when women exhibit masculine and I'm using air quotes here, masculine qualities, they get poo-pooed on for it. And I think that we also have to take control of our labels. Judy, have you experienced that in your own life?
Well, of course. Right. I mean, like I said, I do have attributes that are, leaning towards the masculine side. And I feel like part of all of this, and Kristen, we've come around to this quite a bit on the radio show, is going deep within yourself and knowing who you are. And when you follow a book like this and you read it, I feel like we need to start with the inner voice and what's inside of us and what we really want to apply a lot of these tools. Right. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if it was with Amy or Catherine that said, you can't just walk into your office and all of a sudden cry and stamp on the floor and talk about your period and everything else. I mean, it's just, there is a line that has to be drawn. But I think the more that we have this conversation and start with what's inside of us and then slowly apply these tools that we're talking about in the book, embrace your glamour, be emotional, be seductive, be controlling. There's always a certain, I guess, barometer that we need to adhere to in applying those. But definitely, absolutely, you need to read this book and really look deep in within yourself.
It's so true. I mean, I was just going to say, I think there's it really starts with you in that exploration, and we haven't had permission to do that. I love that the name of today's show is Unapologetically Female. First of all, we actually have a chapter on encouraging women to apologize because we're told not to apologize. So that's also potentially controversial, but in a good way. But really, this is an opportunity to take all these ways in which we've been either belittled or embarrassed or ways we're beating ourselves up, which of course women tend to do, and taking the shackles off and giving ourselves a little more freedom to explore kind of what works and what doesn't, instead of relying on these perceived societal limits. And so that it really, as you said, it's a sort of internal journey first and foremost, and it really complements a lot of the work that's being done externally.
It is about asking questions, asking ourselves questions, asking ourselves, which of these stereotypes provoke me, which spark for me, which are ones that I feel like I need to investigate more fully. And to Amy's point and to yours, try to shake off to the extent we can the social stereotypes and the cultural baggage that are attached to them. And to go back to the earlier point, which is an important one, the double standards, because you're quite right that many of these characteristics are ones that have very, very loaded feminine stereotypes attached to them, but they're also ones, masculine correspondents, that aren't as disparaged. So, for example, in our discussions, and we discuss this in discussions like the chapter on flirting or on being seductive, on being glamorous, that there are actually really, powerful corollaries, in masculinity. For example, we rarely enter boys as flirts, or when we do, it's very, very teasing, and we're kind of feminizing their behavior when we do it. We do talk to them about them being charismatic or charming or magnetic, and or able to influence people, those in very positive light. For all the baggage around Bill Clinton, he used to be considered just this, extraordinarily charismatic man, and it really came down to it. He was a flirt, right? But it was framed as a key point, a key element of his power, that he was able to charm people. Whereas with women, we think of it as something flighty or silly or unserious or overly romantic or overly dreamy, or something dangerous, it's bloody, it's seductive, that sort of thing. So part of what we're doing themselves and, anyone reading this to ask themselves, what's the baggage attached to these ideas when they think about how they apply to themselves? And then ask whether it's worth peeling that back, right? And to Amy's point, they're not going to read the same way to everybody. Not every female reader is going to respond to every chapter in the same way, but that's part of the point. The point is just to ask the question,
And I think you make a very great point, Amy, about how, the way we frame language about what's charisma and what's just being a flirt. But I think I would add to that myself is, does that characteristic, as a woman, does that characteristic you're expressing serve a patriarchal society, or does it not? Does it further a patriarchal agenda, or does it not? And the answer to that question, whether that's yes or is that no, is going to kind of determine whether that label gets heaped on you in a positive way or in a negative way. But I guess one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is, we talk, and Catherine, because you come from an academic background, we use that word patriarchy. And it's what I like to call, it's a college word. If you've been to college, you've heard it. And we talk about it a little bit in the news, but how do we get it out of the book and into day-to-day life to where we can lessen it or mold it into something that's more life-affirming and more positive for women in their day-to-day lives?
Yeah, but like right now.
Yeah, today.
By next week. By next week, immediately. Well, I think that, patriarchy is, it's a college word. My husband calls them PhD words, when he's teasing me.
I call them SAT words.
Sure. Yeah. It's, we put a lot of big words on these, but end of the day, what we usually call the patriarchy is just our culture, right? Masculinity is so shaped our culture, primarily Western culture, but others as well, that what we think of as human is really masculine, right? So we've normalized masculinity to the extent, and the reason why patriarchy is used in feminist conversations is because it sort of points out how dominant these ideas are. They're so dominant that we've internalized them and just established them as the norm. So to answer the question of how do you change it or how do you shift it, I really do think, neither Amy nor I are blowing smoke when we say try a different kind of practice, right? Start conversations. Ask yourself the question of when somebody says you're too emotional, you're too sensitive, or you're crying too much, or says of somebody else, or you hear it spoken in the culture, ask whether that's really true and why we frame things that way. Start conversations with other women, especially with men and boys, about why we frame certain things as girly and therefore weak, or why we frame crying or sensitivity as problematic. And take whatever opportunities you can find to try to embody or enact something that's a little bit different, right? Making space, if you manage a team or run a business, for somebody to feel okay about blushing or starting to cry a little bit or be emotional in a meeting. Trying to reframe in a conversation, if somebody calls you or you hear somebody call a girl or a woman a flirt, ask them what they mean by that, right? Mm-hmm. Start to tackle these cultural ideas. I think if we start to tackle these cultural ideas in our daily lives, both for ourselves personally and in our conversations with other women and girls and boys and men, then we can start to shift how we think about these things a little bit. And the more we shift how we think about these things, I think the more we'll be able to shift the culture.
So
I'm so glad you brought that up, Catherine, because there's zero question. I think asking questions is very powerful, and there's no question that we not only can we be part of the solution, but currently we are part of the problem, because we are using language which continues to reinforce a lot of these stereotypes. We are making offhanded remarks about the fact that woman wore that short skirt to work, or that we might describe other women as sluts even, and what are the messages that sends? It just reinforces the problem. I actually had a personal experience when I first started my business. We were representing even more female athletes than we are now as their sports agents. And I had a very strong point of view initially about female athletes taking their clothes off. for Playboy or FHM or Maxim. And I remember thinking at the time, it's so sad that they feel that they have to do that in order to be marketable, because once they do that, they're going to be pigeonholed. They may appeal to a male audience. They're not going to appeal to a female audience. And I had such strong opinions about it. And interestingly, over the years, I started to see, and there were certain athletes that did that regularly, by the way. And I wondered why they made that decision. And in recent years, I've really concluded that many of them actually love that. That makes them feel powerful. And it's not because they're conforming to what they believe men want. I think that it actually is aligned with who they are. And I will tell you, I still feel that women shouldn't have to do that if they are uncomfortable with that. But I see why for certain women it's the right decision. And so I think even challenging some of our own beliefs and recognizing places where we might be locked up in making judgments of ourselves or other women is a really important starting point.
It's interesting, the kind of the labels that we layer on other people, and then we have to sort of reprogram that. And Catherine, I wanted to talk to you about your other project, Women Rising, which is attempting to become the first female-founded collaborative entertainment studio. And when I read that part, the collaborative entertainment studio, I was like, oh no, she's going to get labeled as a socialist. Collaborative economy. People are still very, very wary of collaboration, and women do well in collaborations. So I had to ask you, why isn't it enough just to be a female-led company using traditional business models, using a more hierarchical structure that, sort of a top-down structure that we're used to? Why are you using this business model to showcase women? Is there, what's the thinking behind that?
Because I really believe that it's very, very difficult for us it's going to be very difficult for us culturally and industry-wise to make space for new and diverse voices in the current structure. Storytelling generally throughout history, for the entirety of human history, has been very, very gate-kept, right? Mm-hmm. It is really recent in human history that women have had sort of broad access to public mechanisms of storytelling, able to tell their stories in the public sphere. Usually it's even in the realm of parenting. Men have written the books, right? Men have written the TV shows. Men have written the movies. Not just because men dominate, but because these are, access to the tools of storytelling have historically been very, very elite, and behind a lot of gates. So we really believe that if you're going to create a larger pipeline of storytellers, if you're going to make space for more voices, new stories, different types of stories told from different perspectives, you have to give more people access to the tools and access to the resources. And you can only do that by creating collaborative opportunities. Now, the collaboration can absolutely be read as, for lack of a better word, sort of socialist, right? Collaboration and cooperation are really strongly coded feminine. But this isn't a new thing, and it's certainly not unknown even in the Hollywood system. The earliest studios that were artist collaborations, and at a time, notably, when women had more access to studio resource and were able to do more in the industry, they were really run like guilds, right? They were wildly collaborative. There was a lot of in-community mentorship and nurturing that made space for more people, including more women, in the early the 1930s, to have access to tools to make movies. So what we're trying to do is create more space in the industry for those voices to come forward, and we do believe that requires collaboration. So it isn't there as a signal to the world that this is a kinder, friendlier, more feminine way of doing things, although we think that it is. We actually think that it's the only business model that's going to work to really bring in a new pipeline of story creators and to do it at scale. So it's a case where, and I have said in a few conversations, it is and does feel rightly like a very feminine model, but it's one where we think is really going to have a very powerful on business. It's not just a do good, feel good thing.
So I have to ask. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna ask. Obviously, the business model is collaborative, but you're functioning in an economy that's competitive, and there's also this negative stereotype that women can get fiercely competitive with each other, whereas men are applauded for that. Women are not. How do you manage that tension between competitiveness and collaboration?
Well, you use the example of men, and I think that's the best example, right? Men collaborate a lot, right? Men are socialized. It's one of the advantages they have socially in that they're socialized to not see competition and collaboration as at odds with each other. They don't see competition and friendship or social relationship at odds with each other. Men can play a game of football and then be drinking beer together, after the fact. Women, on the other hand, are socialized to see competition as problematic. We're socialized to see cooperation as part of our social currency, and the thing for which we're most highly valued. And there's really great academic research on this moral and psychological development that we actually push our competitive foot underground. It's one of the reasons for things like girl-on-girl fighting, right, for women competing with each other and backstabbing each other, is because we don't know how to collaborate and compete in the same territory. We see them as being at odds. Whereas really, when you look at how men proceed through the business world, being mentored by each other, by socializing, playing golf, discussing business over beer, really taking opportunities to navigate a social world, in a manner that serves their ambition, is something that we could learn from. Now, there's obviously stuff that's really problematic about the patriarchal / capitalist model of doing business, but we think that it's not at odds. It's that the collaborative element, the cooperative element, and the competitive element are not at odds with each other. So what we want to do is build a model in which it's not everybody get together and everybody is equal, on a set or in a given creative environment, but where there are opportunities for hands-on mentorship, right? Where there are opportunities to learn through practice, opportunities to have access to other women who are a little bit further along in their careers and learn from them, so that more doorways and pathways are opened in a way that serves men for generations, frankly.
And I think mentorship comes from having compassion, compassion for other people and wanting to lead the way in ways that they might not see. We only have a few more minutes, and I know Kristen and I have about 5 more pages of questions. So we would love to have you guys back. But I have a question for Amy. You've played a lot in the men's industries, from sports, to marketing, and I'm just wondering what you see as one of the most powerful traits that men have in business that you wish women would have more of.
Well, I couldn't agree more. First of all, I've never really felt particularly aware of being a woman in my work environment unless I was paying close attention to that. I feel really fortunate. Even if I've worked in male-dominated industries like sports, maybe because I've created a niche that still has lots of women engaged, I haven't had this feeling of either not being treated equally or not having the same opportunities, and I feel really grateful for that. That said, I will say I have very clear recollection of my early bosses in advertising, and they were primarily women, and it was rough. It was sort of classic, stereotypically catty female environments where I felt like behind closed doors, women were talking about each other. There was so much time wasted. on non-work related stuff and getting carried away about things that really didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. And then during the Olympic bid, I worked for two very powerful men, one who came from the political realm and one from investment banking. And they were totally different from anyone I'd ever worked with. They were extremely direct, extremely assertive, sometimes yellers even. And I got to tell you, I loved it because for me, it was so refreshing to be around people who just told it how it was. I never had to guess. I never thought to myself, ooh, I wonder how they felt about that presentation or if they're happy with my work, or I always knew. And so I've definitely modeled myself, that part of myself, after them, where I bring a very direct style to the way that I run my business and manage my employees. And I think sometimes in the beginning, it's almost a little jarring for them because they're just not used to it. And women aren't used to even receiving criticism from other women or feedback. It doesn't even need to be criticism because they're used to this more subtle, sometimes unintentionally or intentionally passive-aggressive approach. And of course, these are generalizations, but based on my own experience. And so I've had certain women who at first are kind of not sure how to deal with the fact that I'm more direct, but then over time, it really builds trust. And it allows them to feel so much more comfortable because they know that things aren't always going to be perfect all the time, but that if things require a new approach or if things could have been done in a better way, we'll just talk about it and then we'll move right on. We won't have a lot of ongoing discussion. It will be just addressed and on we go. So in some ways, these are examples of some of the masculine qualities that I developed that I think are extremely useful. And I'm so grateful for it because it really has impacted the way I work, and I think the way that people respond to me if they're working with or for me, clients as well. And they know what they get with me, and I really treasure that in other people.
Okay, so basically be straight up.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, and we only have about a minute or two left, but I do feel like being emotional and showing your feelings sometimes leads to not being, straightforward. And so it's a little bit of a conflict there for me, only because, like I said, I feel like, I do have a little bit more of a masculine side. I am the same way. I like to be direct. I was working with somebody the other day where she's like, look, don't take anything I say personally. I said, we're not talking about a personal relationship here with my boyfriend or someone, we're talking about business. So whatever you have to say, say it and let's work it out. And I do like that. I think it's one of the keys to us working with women, but also men, is just being straightforward and really moving through life in a general way, really. Well, congratulations to both of you. The book is a huge success, and there are so many layers to it that we can learn from and glean from. The Feminine Revolution, it's everywhere out there. You can find it everywhere. Amy, where can people find you as far as a website, or how can they contact you on social media, that type of thing?
Yes, on all of my social media, I'm Amy K. Stanton, and then our company website is stanton-company.com. And we also have social for the book, Feminine Revolution Book on Instagram, FemRev Book on Twitter, and femininerevolutionbook.com is our book website.
And Catherine, how can we find you?
Most of my social channels are at Her Bad Mother, HERBADMOTHER. It's had the handle for a very long time. So I can be found through that.
I love that. Well, thank you both so much for coming on the show. It was a fantastic conversation. I'd like to continue it for another show eventually. I appreciate the time that you're giving us with 2 weeks into the book launch. I know you guys are very, very busy, so we appreciate the time. And for everyone else listening out there, next week we are taking the giving out of Thanksgiving and finding out how Sue Matthews is helping to keep her daughter's legacy going with funding for pediatric cancer after she was diagnosed at age 11 and unfortunately didn't make it past the age of 16. And internationally renowned jewelry designer Alzarina Gomes is paying it forward after growing up without a pair of shoes before the age of 14, and she's helping her small hometown get the clothing and the shoes that they need. I can't wait to hear their stories too. Don't miss one show. Go to whatwomenwantradio.com for more, and we'll see you next week. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
You're listening to What Women Want with Judy Goss and Kristen West, only on LA Talk Radio.